My husband cheated and moved his secret family into our home. I stayed silent, but the storm I unleashed left their ruin inevitable. I once believed in love. Not the kind you read about in novels, exaggerated and idealized, but the kind that felt real, steady, grounding, and promising. When I married Ryan, I thought I had found exactly that. He was charming, successful, and had this effortless confidence that made it easy to trust him. Too easy. Our wedding had been small but beautiful, a ceremony filled with whispered promises, the scent of fresh roses in the air, and the warmth of his hand in mine. Every detail felt right. There were no red flags, no cold feet, only the certainty that I had made the right choice. At least that's what I convinced myself. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals come from those we trust the most, but true strength is found in rising above them. 3 months had passed since that day, and I had settled into the quiet rhythm of married life. Ryan was the CEO of a mid-sized company, a man who was always busy, always moving. His schedule demanded frequent travel, but I had no reason to question it. He assured me it was just business. "I'll be gone for a few days," he would say, pressing a quick kiss to my forehead. "Don't wait up," and I never did. At first his absences felt normal. After all, success came with responsibilities, and I had no intention of being the kind of spouse who questioned every late night or business trip. I wanted to be supportive, understanding, a good partner. But as time went on, a shadow of doubt began creeping in, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. It started with little things. A faint scent of perfume on his shirt that wasn't mine, an unusual hesitation when I asked about his day, a missed call notification on his phone, the name swiftly deleted before I could process it. I would remind myself not to be paranoid. Marriage required trust, and I refused to let baseless suspicions take root. I buried the discomfort, told myself he loved me, and that love meant not second-guessing everything. But doubt is a persistent thing. Once planted, it grows, weaving into thoughts, staining even the happiest moments with quiet unease. I didn't want to snoop, didn't want to become someone who searched for evidence where there should be none. But deep inside, I knew something was off. Then came the locked drawer in his home office. Ryan had always been meticulous, organized to the point of obsession. His office was no exception, papers stacked neatly, files labeled, everything in its place, but the drawer on the left side of his desk remained locked. I noticed it one evening while tidying up, my fingers instinctively reaching for the handle. It didn't budge. A harmless detail, perhaps, but why lock a drawer inside his own home? "Why do you keep this locked?" I asked casually one night, gesturing towards it. Ryan barely looked up from his laptop. "Confidential work files," he replied smoothly. "Just company policies." I nodded, pretending to accept his answer, but my instincts whispered otherwise. Our home was beautiful, yet it lacked something essential: warmth. I spent my days alone, wandering through rooms that felt more like an exhibit than a shared life. I decorated, cooked, and told myself I was happy, but happiness is a strange thing. It loses its luster when there's no one to share it with. Ryan called when he could, brief conversations that felt more like obligation than affection. "How was your day?" he would ask, but he never truly listened. The distance between us grew, not in miles but in the space we once filled with laughter and conversation. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I received a message from him, running late. "Don't wait up." I stared at the screen, an ache forming in my chest. 3 months into marriage, and I was already dining alone more often than not. That night, as I sat at the table eating in silence, I let the truth sink in. This wasn't the life I had imagined. Something wasn't right, and I was done pretending otherwise. Determined to shake the doubts clinging to my mind, I decided to pay more attention. I observed the way he spoke, how his stories changed slightly each time he recounted a trip, the way he avoided eye contact when I brought up certain topics, how he never let his phone out of his sight. Then there was the moment. I knew, without a shred of doubt, that something was wrong. Ryan had just returned from yet another trip, and as he greeted me at the door, I caught sight of his wristwatch. It was a sleek, expensive timepiece, one I knew well because I had gifted it to him. But today, something was different. The leather strap was slightly darker, the edges more worn. It looked similar, but it wasn't the same one. I said nothing, merely smiled and welcomed him home, but my mind was racing. If he had lost the watch, why hadn't he told me? And if he hadn't lost it, then why did he need a second identical one? People don't replace things unless they have a reason to. I had no proof, no confirmation, but I no longer needed them. The dream was unraveling. Doubt turned into certainty, and certainty turned into resolve. Ryan thought I was naive, that I would never question him, never dig deeper. But he had underestimated me. I began paying closer attention, listening, watching. I noticed the way his phone vibrated at odd hours, the way he always positioned it face down. Then one night, while he was fast asleep, his phone lit up with a message. Curiosity burned through me, but I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to, because at that moment I realized something even more important. I no longer cared about confronting him. I didn't need a dramatic revelation, didn't need to demand answers from a man who had already betrayed my trust. What I needed was something far greater, an escape plan. The realization was liberating. I had entered this marriage believing in a fairy tale, but fairy tales weren't real. What was real was the deception, the carefully spun lies, the life I had unknowingly walked into. Ryan was a puzzle with missing pieces, a book with entire chapters torn out, and I was done trying to make sense of him. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet, because confronting him meant giving him control over the narrative, allowing him to twist the truth, to manipulate, to gaslight. If he had been playing a game all along, it was time I played one too, but on my terms. I continued to act normal. I smiled at him, kissed him goodbye before his trips, played the role of the unsuspecting wife. But inside, I was already planning. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about justice. He thought he was untouchable, that I was just another piece in his carefully curated life. He had no idea that the woman he had so effortlessly deceived was about to become his greatest downfall. And the best part? He would never see it coming. This is just the beginning. The foundation has been laid, the pieces are falling into place, and now the real game begins. Ryan's deception had woven itself into every thread of our marriage. A carefully crafted illusion that I had unknowingly stepped into. But now I saw it for what it was, a performance. Every whispered promise, every absent-minded kiss before a trip, every I love you spoken out of habit rather than truth. I had spent months trying to force the pieces together, only to realize the picture they formed had never been what I thought. The clarity was sobering, and with it came something even stronger than betrayal, a purpose. I played my role perfectly, letting him believe I was the same oblivious woman who had once adored him without question. I greeted him with a smile when he returned from his business trips, listened to his half-hearted stories about long meetings and sleepless nights in hotel rooms. I nodded along, letting him think he still held the power. But inside I was waiting, watching, gathering every scrap of information that could be used against him. Then one evening, everything changed. He arrived home later than usual, his shirt slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened in a way that told me he had put it back on hastily. I was standing in the kitchen, pouring tea, when he leaned against the doorway, watching me. His expression was different, more relaxed, almost amused. "We need to talk," he said, his voice holding none of the usual warmth he faked so well. I turned, keeping my expression neutral. "About what?" He exhaled heavily, as if he were about to tell me something exhausting rather than life-altering. "I didn't marry you for love." The words weren't a revelation to me, but hearing them spoken aloud was like having the air knocked from my lungs. Still, I kept my face unreadable, gripping the handle of my cup a little tighter. He stepped forward, crossing the space between us with the kind of arrogance only a man who believed he was untouchable could possess. "You were convenient," he said. "I needed someone who could take care of things for me, and you fit the role." A slight smirk played at the corner of his lips, as if he expected me to crumble, to plead for an explanation. But I remained silent, waiting for him to continue, for the final nail in the coffin of the marriage I had once cherished. He sighed, as if burdened by the very conversation he had initiated. "There's something you should know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I already have a child." The words hung in the air like a thick fog. He watched me, gauging my reaction, but I didn't flinch. If he was expecting shock, devastation, or anger, he got none of it. I had already unraveled this truth on my own. What I wanted now was to hear him say it, to give me the ammunition I needed. His lips curled slightly, amused by my silence. "Didn't expect that, did you?" he continued, mistaking my composure for ignorance. "A son, 4 years old." I set my cup down carefully, the porcelain clicking softly against the counter. "And his mother?" I asked, my voice steady. His smirk deepened. "She's around, but raising a kid? Not her thing." He exhaled, shaking his head. "And I didn't want this either. Never planned for it. But things happen." "Things happen?" He spoke about his own child as if he were discussing an unfortunate inconvenience. Something that had simply disrupted his well-orchestrated life. "So you married me," I said, forcing the words through the tightness in my throat. He nodded. "Because a stepmother is better than a nanny." The casual cruelty in his voice sent a chill through me, but I refused to let it show. I had spent months thinking I was the fool in this relationship, but in that moment, I realized something. He was the fool. He believed he was in control, that I was nothing more than an obedient fixture in his life. I saw it for what it was. A man who had manipulated every piece of his life to serve his convenience, now setting the final stage. And I let him. I nodded, the picture of a dutiful wife. "If that's what you want." A slow smile spread across his face, satisfied. "Good. I knew you'd understand." Understand? I understood more than he could possibly imagine. I understood that he was a man who believed his actions had no consequences. That he had spent years crafting lies without ever considering that someone might be patient enough to outplay him. That in his arrogance he had overlooked the one he never should have. Me that night as he slept soundly beside me, believing he had secured his future exactly as he wanted. I made a decision. I wasn't just going to leave. That would be too easy, too kind. No, I was going to ensure that when the day came that he finally realized what I had done, it would be too late to stop it. My revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be dramatic or chaotic. It would be something much worse. It would be inevitable. I turned my head slightly, watching him in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. He looked so peaceful, so certain of his own untouchable position. He had no idea that his carefully constructed world had already begun to collapse. That the woman lying next to him, the one he thought was weak, trapped, powerless, was the very one who would destroy him. And the best part? He had handed me every weapon I needed. Ryan had handed me the ammunition I needed without realizing it. He had spoken so freely, so carelessly, believing I had no power to challenge him. In his mind, I was already defeated, just another pawn in his well-crafted life. But he had underestimated me. That was his first mistake. As he slept soundly beside me, his breathing even and untroubled, I slipped out of bed. My heart pounded in my chest, but not with fear. This was something else, a quiet, calculated determination. I padded barefoot to the corner of the room where my phone lay on the nightstand. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of the city outside, shadows stretching along the walls. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering for a moment before I pressed record. I whispered his words back, repeating them exactly as he had said them to me just hours ago. His confession about why he married me, the way he spoke of his child as an afterthought, his complete disregard for the life he had built with me, treating our marriage as nothing more than a convenient solution to his personal problem. Every syllable, every cruel statement, was now captured. I ended the recording and exhaled slowly. This was only the beginning. The next day, I continued playing the part. I greeted him as he left for work, kissing him lightly on the cheek. He smiled at me, like a man who had nothing to fear. "I'll be late again tonight," he said casually, straightening his tie. I nodded, as if his words didn't sting. "I'll see you when you get home." As soon as he was gone, I got to work. My first step was securing evidence. I needed more than just a recording. I needed undeniable proof of the life he had hidden from me. His locked drawer had intrigued me for weeks, and now I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I walked into his office, my pulse steady but my mind racing. The drawer was still locked, but I had noticed long ago that Ryan wasn't as meticulous as he believed himself to be. He was careless in small ways, underestimating me in every aspect. I ran my fingers along the edges of his desk, checking the usual spots where people absent-mindedly place things. And there it was, tucked beneath a stack of business papers, barely concealed, a small silver key. I held it between my fingers for a moment before kneeling down, sliding it into the lock. A quiet click, and the drawer opened. Inside, neatly stacked, were documents. I sifted through them quickly, scanning the contents. Then I found it. A birth certificate, a bank account under his child's name, receipts for expensive gifts, plane tickets, hotel bookings. Things that had nothing to do with his so-called business trips. He had been living two lives, one where he played the devoted husband, another where he played the reluctant father. I pulled out my phone and took photos of everything. This wasn't just for me. This was my insurance. If I was going to take him down, I needed leverage. By the time I had locked the drawer again and placed the key back exactly where I found it, my plan had solidified. Now I needed patience. The next few days passed in a blur of carefully measured steps. I didn't confront him. I didn't act any differently. I simply observed. Each evening, as he returned home late, I memorized every detail. How he smelled of perfume that wasn't mine. How his expression seemed slightly rehearsed when he spoke to me. The small moments of hesitation in his answers. The way his phone never left his side. And when he slept, I listened. Ryan had always been a heavy sleeper, and I took advantage of it. I unlocked his phone one night, carefully angling his finger against the sensor while he was in deep sleep. My hands didn't shake, my breath remained even. I wasn't afraid. His messages confirmed what I already knew. Conversations with his mistress were casual, filled with short responses and dismissive remarks. He was keeping her at a distance, just as he kept me. "She doesn't suspect anything," he had written. "She's too soft for that." Soft. That was what he thought of me. I smiled slightly, tucking the phone back where it was. Ryan had unknowingly built the foundation of his own downfall. A week later, I received a call that changed everything. It was from an unknown number, a woman's voice, sharp and impatient, on the other end. "I need to talk to you." I didn't recognize her at first, but then she said his name, Ryan. She was his mistress. I felt a strange kind of amusement settle in my chest. She thought I was the clueless wife, just as he had. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice calm. "I want you to back off," she said bluntly. "Ryan's not going to stay with you. He's only with you for his son, and once the kid is old enough, he'll leave you too." The arrogance in her voice was almost laughable. She had no idea how deep my plans already ran. I let her speak, feeding her confidence. The more she talked, the more she revealed about their meetings. About how he promised her he was only waiting for the right time to leave. About how he had made a fool of me. I thanked her politely before ending the call. Then I sat there for a long moment staring at my reflection in the darkened screen of my phone. Soft. That was what they thought of me. They had no idea that I was already 10 steps ahead. The beauty of silent betrayal was that no one saw it coming. Ryan thought he controlled the narrative, but I had rewritten the ending. His mistress thought she had the upper hand, but she was just another piece on my board. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was collecting their secrets, their lies, their mistakes. Every careless word, every misstep was another tool in my hand. I was going to ruin him, but I wasn't going to do it in anger. Anger was predictable. Anger made people reckless. No, I was going to do it with patience, with precision. I was going to make sure that when he fell, there would be no way back up. And the best part? He still had no idea what was coming. Soft. That was the word they kept using. Ryan, his mistress. They both believed I was weak, that I would accept whatever life they decided to hand me. They thought I had no choice, that I would remain the passive wife, too naive to fight back. They had no idea they had just given me every reason to destroy them. The phone call with his mistress lingered in my mind, not because of what she said, but because of how easily she had spoken. She truly believed she was in control, that she had already won. I let her believe that. I let Ryan believe it too, because the longer they underestimated me, the more devastating my revenge would be. And then the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. Ryan walked into the house late one evening, but this time, he wasn't alone. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book, when I heard the front door open. The weight of multiple footsteps echoed across the marble floor. I didn't move, didn't react, but I knew this was it, the final insult. His voice rang out, casual, unaffected, as if he were greeting an old friend. "We're home. We." I turned my head slowly, my heart steady, my breathing even, and there they were. Ryan stood with his usual smug expression, a look of quiet satisfaction playing at the corners of his lips. But it wasn't just him. Beside him stood a woman I had never met in person but knew all too well, his mistress. And clinging to her hand was a boy, his son. A 4-year-old child with Ryan's sharp features and dark hair, looking up at me with wide, innocent eyes. Ryan's gaze flickered to the boy before turning back to me. Then, with the same ease with which he had once told me my marriage was nothing more than a convenience, he pointed at me and spoke, directing his words toward his son. "Meet your new maid," he said. "She'll take care of you now." The mistress laughed, the sound cutting through the air like a blade, sharp and mocking, as if my humiliation was the most amusing thing she had ever witnessed. She wasn't trying to hide it. She was enjoying this. In that moment, I realized something. I had spent weeks planning my revenge, gathering proof, preparing myself for the right moment to strike. But this was a gift. They had just handed me the perfect justification for everything I was about to do. I forced myself to react exactly as they expected. I let my eyes widen slightly, let my lips part as if I were struggling for words. I saw the satisfaction in Ryan's face, the delight in hers. They thought they had broken me, but inside, I was smiling because they had just sealed their fate. Ryan turned to his son, crouching slightly. "She'll be looking after you from now on," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "She's here to do whatever you need." The child didn't respond. He just stared at me, his small face unreadable. I wondered if he could sense something they couldn't, if he could see past the mask I was wearing. I nodded, schooling my features into something neutral. "Of course," I said softly. "I'll take care of him." Ryan's mistress smirked. "See? She understands her place." Her words barely registered. I was too focused on the moment, on the weight of what had just happened. Ryan wasn't just bringing his child into my home, he was rubbing my face in it, showing me that in his eyes I wasn't even worth basic respect. He didn't want a wife, he wanted a servant. And that was my breaking point. That night, as they settled in as if this were their home, I sat in my room, my mind sharper than ever. The pieces of my plan had been scattered before, moving too slowly, but now everything was crystal clear. It was time to act. The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I made breakfast, set the table, and listened as Ryan and his mistress talked about their plans, about how things were finally falling into place. I moved through the house like I was invisible, just as they wanted me to be. And while they laughed, I prepared. The documents I had taken from Ryan's drawer, copies had already been made. The recording of his confession had been sent to a secure location. His phone, I had already extracted more than enough messages, calls, and financial records to expose him for exactly who he was. But that wasn't enough because I didn't just want to ruin him. I wanted him to watch as everything he thought he controlled slipped right through his fingers. I had already started planting seeds with his son, small, careful conversations, questions asked at the right moments. I didn't tell him anything outright. I didn't have to. Children sense things, even when adults think they don't. And this child, he was already beginning to sense the truth. The first time I played Ryan's recorded words near him, it was subtle. I left my phone on the counter, letting the recording play faintly as I stepped away. Ryan's voice filled the air, casual, indifferent. I didn't want a kid. I never planned for it. The boy froze, his tiny hands clenched into fists, his eyes, so much like Ryan's, darkened. And I knew in that moment that my revenge had truly begun. Ryan had brought this child here to manipulate me, to use me. But what he didn't realize was that he had just given me the one person who could destroy him from the inside, his own son. I turned off the recording before the boy could ask questions. Not yet. It had to be slow, a carefully built storm, one that would crash over Ryan when he least expected it. As days passed, I let small truths slip into conversations. I treated the boy with genuine kindness, never forcing anything, never saying too much. But I saw it, the shift. He started asking questions, started noticing the way his father spoke to me, the way his mother laughed at me, the way I never spoke back. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up at me with those same dark eyes. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question caught me off guard, but I smiled gently. "Why do you ask?" He hesitated. "You don't laugh like they do." I ran my fingers through his hair, my heart twisting, not for me but for him. He was already beginning to understand the kind of people his parents were. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I whispered, "Good night." He stared at me for a moment longer before closing his eyes. I stepped out of the room and met Ryan's gaze in the hallway. He had been watching. "Getting close, huh?" he remarked, his voice laced with amusement. I smiled, but inside I was laughing, because he had no idea that his perfect little world had already begun to collapse. And the best part? He had been the one to hand me the match. Ryan's smirk lingered in my mind long after he had walked away. He truly believed I was playing along, that I had accepted my fate as the invisible caretaker, the discarded wife who would silently fade into the background. But he was wrong. I wasn't fading. I was watching, waiting, setting the stage for something he would never see coming that night. As I lay in bed, I listened to the faint sound of his laughter with his mistress down the hall. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. I curled my fingers into the fabric of my blanket, letting the quiet fury fuel me. If they wanted to laugh, I would let them, because soon that laughter would turn into silence. The first step of my plan was simple: patience. Revenge wasn't about immediate action. It was about control, about making sure every move was so precise, so calculated, that by the time the target realized what was happening, it was already too late. And my first tool? His own son. The boy had already started asking questions, but I knew that wasn't enough. I needed to make him see, not by telling him outright. I would never speak against his father directly. That would only make him resist. Instead, I guided him toward the truth, letting him discover it piece by piece, so that when the realization finally hit, it would be something he accepted on his own. One evening, as I was helping him with a puzzle in the living room, I let my phone play a quiet recording, just enough for his small ears to catch the words without it seeming intentional. Ryan's voice filled the air, casual, indifferent. I didn't want a kid. I never planned for it. The boy froze. His little fingers, which had been reaching for a puzzle piece, trembled slightly. His wide eyes lifted to me, confused. Who said that? I acted quickly, pretending to fumble with my phone as I shut it off. Oh, I said softly, feigning regret. That was just an old recording. Forget about it. But he didn't forget. He sat there, staring at me, his young mind working through the words he had just heard. I could see the storm brewing in his small features. He didn't cry, didn't say anything right away, but I knew he was thinking about it. And once a child starts questioning, they never stop. The next few days, he was quieter. He watched his father differently, his little brows furrowed in thought. I noticed how he hesitated before running to Ryan when he returned home, how he didn't immediately reach for his father's hand like he used to. Ryan was too absorbed in his own world to notice the shift, but I did. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he asked, "Do parents always love their kids?" I stilled, my fingers tightening around the blanket I was pulling over him. It was an innocent question, spoken with the raw vulnerability only a child could have. I forced my voice to remain steady. "Why do you ask?" He bit his lip, staring up at the ceiling. "Just wondering." I sat down beside him, brushing his hair back gently. "Parents should love their children," I said carefully. "But sometimes, grown-ups don't always do the right thing." His small hands clenched the blanket. "But they should." A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "Yes," I whispered. "They should." The next phase of my plan involved Ryan himself. If I wanted his son to see the truth, I needed to give him more moments of clarity, moments where he would realize on his own who his father really was. So I began planting the seeds. At dinner, when Ryan would talk about his so-called hard work providing for his family, I would glance at his son, just briefly, letting the child see the unspoken weight in my eyes. The boy would look between us, confused, sensing the gap between his father's words and reality. When Ryan ignored his son's attempts to get his attention, too busy scrolling on his phone or laughing with his mistress, I made sure the child noticed. I never pointed it out, I didn't need to. The neglect spoke for itself. Then the real turning point came one evening. Ryan was on the phone, pacing the living room, his voice sharp, annoyed. "I don't have time for this," he snapped. "I'm not some babysitter. That's why I brought her here." I wasn't even in the room, but I knew his son was. I waited. An hour later, as I was folding laundry, the boy walked in. His face was tight, his small hands clenched into fists. He climbed onto the bed beside me, silent, his little mind turning over thoughts too big for him. Then, finally, he whispered, "He doesn't want me." The words were barely audible, but they struck with the force of a storm. I turned to him, my chest tightening. "Why do you say that?" He shook his head, but I could see it, the understanding creeping in, the innocence shattering piece by piece. I wrapped an arm around him, holding him close. "You are important," I told him softly. "You deserve to be loved." He didn't answer, but he leaned into me, and I knew that was enough. The final stage of my plan was approaching. Ryan had no idea that his own son, the child he had tried so hard to dismiss, was slipping away from him, and when the moment came for him to realize it, it would be far too late to fix it. A few days later, I overheard an argument between Ryan and his mistress. Their voices carried through the house, sharp and filled with tension. "You were supposed to handle this," she hissed. "He's acting different." Ryan exhaled in frustration. "He's a kid. He'll get over it," but I knew the truth, he wouldn't get over it. The child had already started down the path of realization, and once that process begins, it cannot be undone. He was beginning to see his father for who he truly was. That evening, as I stood in the doorway of the child's room, watching him sleep, I felt no guilt for what I had done, because I hadn't lied to him. I hadn't manipulated him. I had simply shown him the truth Ryan had tried so hard to bury. And soon, that truth would be the very thing that destroyed him. Because once a child understands that love should not be conditional, that they deserve better, they will never look at the person who failed them the same way again. Ryan had brought his son here to control me, but in the end, his son would be the one to bring him to his knees. And I would be there, watching, as the empire he had built on lies finally crumbled beneath him. I stood in the doorway, watching the child sleep, his small chest rising and falling with each quiet breath. He had spent the evening in silence, barely touching his dinner, his gaze distant. The truth was sinking in, piece by piece, unraveling the illusions his father had built around him. He was beginning to see, and once a child starts to see, there is no turning back. I stepped back into the hallway, closing the door softly behind me. Ryan was in the living room, slumped on the couch, scrolling through his phone. His mistress sat beside him, sipping from a glass of water, her legs tucked beneath her as if she belonged there. They looked comfortable, at ease, as if their little arrangement was permanent. I watched them for a moment, unseen, before turning away. They had no idea that the very foundation they stood on was cracking beneath them. The next morning, the child hesitated before joining them at the table. His small hands were clenched at his sides, his eyes darting between his parents. Ryan barely noticed, too busy sending messages on his phone. The mistress, sensing nothing, gave him a bright, artificial smile. "Come sit, sweetheart," she cooed, patting the seat next to her. He hesitated before walking over. I saw the way he sat stiffly, his back too straight for a child his age, the way his fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. He was holding something back. I waited. Midway through breakfast, Ryan finally looked up. "What's with you this morning?" he asked, his tone impatient. The child swallowed hard, then in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Do you love me?" The room fell silent. Ryan blinked, taken aback by the question. "What?" The child lifted his gaze, his small features tight with something that wasn't anger. It was something deeper, something raw. "Do you love me?" he repeated. Ryan scoffed. "Of course I do. What kind of question is that?" But his son didn't look convinced. "Then why did you say you didn't want me?" Ryan stiffened. The mistress stopped mid-sip, her eyes widening. I kept my expression neutral, watching the scene unfold exactly as I had planned. Ryan let out a forced chuckle. What are you talking about? The boy's lips pressed into a thin line. I heard you, he said quietly. You said it on the phone. You said you're not a babysitter. That's why you brought her here. The room turned cold. Ryan's mistress set down her glass with a quiet clink. Ryan? She asked hesitantly, glancing at him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, scrambling for a way out. But there wasn't one. The child had heard the truth straight from his father's mouth. Ryan exhaled harshly, running a hand through his hair. You're a kid. You don't understand how things work. But his son wasn't backing down. I understand enough. His voice was no longer trembling. He was steady, certain. Ryan let out a frustrated sigh, pushing his plate away. I don't have time for this, he muttered, standing up. The boy flinched, and that was it. I saw it in his small face, the moment something inside him shifted, a realization so painful it hollowed him out right in front of me. He had always idolized his father, even in moments of neglect. He had held on to the belief that somewhere beneath the cold indifference, there was love. But now, he knew the truth. Ryan wasn't even willing to fight for him. The boy's hands curled into fists. Then slowly, he stood up from his chair, his movements stiff, controlled, as if he was holding something back. He turned and walked past me, heading straight for his room. Ryan let out an irritated sigh. Great, now he's sulking. His mistress shifted uncomfortably. Ryan, maybe we should... But he was already walking away, dismissing the situation as if it were an inconvenience, rather than the unraveling of his own child's trust. I didn't follow the boy immediately. I wanted him to sit with his emotions, to process what had just happened. Some truths had to settle in silence. Later that evening, I knocked on his door. Come in, he said quietly. I stepped inside. He was sitting on the bed, his small hands resting in his lap. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, they betrayed everything. I sat beside him. You okay? He was silent for a long moment before finally whispering he doesn't care about me. My chest tightened. I'm sorry. He turned to me then, his eyes searching mine. But you do. It wasn't a question, it was a quiet statement, filled with something fragile yet strong. I felt my throat tighten. Yes, I said softly. I do. He nodded, as if confirming something to himself, then slowly reached for my hand. I held it, my fingers wrapping gently around his. It wasn't revenge, not in the way I had planned. It was something more. Ryan had thought he was using me, that I was nothing more than a tool, a convenience. But in his arrogance, he had given me the one thing he could never take back, his son's trust. And now, the child who had once looked at his father with admiration was looking at me instead. I squeezed his hand. You're not alone, I told him. You never will be. And in that moment, I knew Ryan had already lost. Because a father who loses his child's love loses everything. And the best part? He had done it all by himself. The boy's hand remained in mine, small and warm, yet steady. The trust he placed in me was no longer tentative. It was complete. His father had lost him without even realizing it. But this wasn't just about a child's shattered admiration. This was about something far bigger. Ryan had spent months believing he controlled everything. That he could manipulate the people around him, mold them to his liking, and discard them when they no longer served a purpose. But in his arrogance, he had overlooked the quietest force in the room. The one who had been watching, waiting, planning, me. And now it was time for everything to fall apart. I gave the boy's hand a gentle squeeze before letting go. Get some rest, I told him softly. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. He nodded, his expression unreadable, but I knew he understood. The next morning, Ryan left the house early, just as he always did. The mistress stayed behind, lounging in the living room like a queen who had claimed her throne. She barely acknowledged me as I moved through the house, humming softly to myself. By midday, my plan was already in motion. I had spent weeks collecting everything I needed. Bank statements, call logs, incriminating messages. I had kept quiet as I built my arsenal, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, that moment had arrived. I sent the first batch of files to his company's board members. Evidence of his shady business dealings, his reckless spending, his unethical decisions. Not enough to completely ruin him. Not yet. Just enough to plant the first seed of doubt. Next, I released the second wave. This time to the people he had fooled into believing he was a family man. Friends, acquaintances, business partners. I sent them carefully selected audio clips, ones that painted him exactly as he was. A man who had married out of convenience. Who had viewed his own child as nothing more than a burden. I didn't stop there. I sent the final piece of the puzzle to the one person who would never forgive him, the child's maternal grandparents. Ryan had cut them out of the boy's life long ago, dismissing them as unnecessary, but now, armed with the truth, they wouldn't stay silent. They would fight, and they would win. By the time Ryan returned home that evening, the first cracks had already formed. He stormed through the front door, his phone clutched tightly in his fist, his face flushed with barely contained rage. His mistress trailed behind him, confusion and worry etched across her features. "What did you do?" he snapped, his voice laced with panic. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "I'm not sure what you mean." He threw his phone onto the table. "My inbox is flooded. The board is demanding an emergency meeting. People are sending me recordings, my own words. How did this happen?" His mistress frowned. "What recordings?" I met her gaze, my smile never faltering. The ones where he admitted he never wanted his son. The ones where he said I was nothing more than a convenient babysitter. Her eyes widened. "Ryan?" Ryan turned on me, his expression darkening. "You set me up." I leaned against the counter, folding my arms. "I didn't set you up. You did this to yourself. You were just too arrogant to notice." His chest rose and fell sharply, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" I let out a soft laugh. "Oh, Ryan," I murmured, "this isn't about winning. This is about justice." At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. I straightened, smoothing out my shirt as I moved toward it. Ryan stood frozen, watching, his instincts finally catching up to him. He knew, before I even turned the handle, that this was the final nail in his carefully constructed life. I opened the door, and there they were, the boys' grandparents, their expressions grim but determined. Ryan's mistress took a step back. "What is this?" she whispered. I turned to Ryan, my voice gentle, almost pitying. "You thought you could erase them," I said. "You thought they didn't matter. But they do." Ryan moved to block them, but the grandfather held up a hand. "I suggest you don't," he warned. "This isn't a request. This is happening." The boy stepped forward from behind me, his eyes locking onto his father's. Ryan's confidence wavered. "Son," he started, his voice uneven, desperate. "You know..." But the boy didn't wait to hear the rest. He turned his back on his father and walked straight into his grandparents' waiting arms. Ryan inhaled sharply, his hands shaking at his sides. "You can't do this." His mistress grabbed his arm. "Ryan, what is happening?" I smiled, slow and victorious. "Your reign is over." The grandmother wrapped an arm protectively around the child. "We'll be taking legal action," she informed Ryan coldly. "And with everything we have, you won't win." Ryan turned to me, his eyes burning with fury. "You did this." I met his gaze head on. "Yes, I did." For the first time, true panic flickered across his face. He had always thought he was untouchable, that no one could outmaneuver him. But now, standing in the wreckage of his own making, he finally understood. He had lost everything. And the best part? He had done it all to himself. I turned to the boy, offering him a reassuring smile. He returned it, small but certain. Then, hand in hand with his grandparents, he walked out the door, leaving his father behind. Ryan staggered back, pressing a hand against the table as if steadying himself. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I shook my head, calm and unwavering. "No, Ryan. The only one with regrets here is you." And with that, I walked away, leaving him to watch as his carefully constructed life crumbled to dust. I didn't look back as I walked away, leaving Ryan standing there in stunned silence. The weight that had once suffocated me lifted. The house that had felt like a prison was nothing more than walls and furniture now, a place that no longer held me captive. Outside, the air was crisp, a silent promise of a new beginning. The boy, now safely in his grandparents' embrace, turned to look at me. There was no confusion in his eyes anymore. No desperate hope that his father would change, only understanding. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. I gave him a small nod, one that said everything he needed to hear. "You're free now." Then they left, disappearing into the evening, their presence lingering only in the relief that settled deep in my chest. Back inside, the reality of what had just happened finally seemed to crash over Ryan. His mistress was speaking in hushed, urgent tones, her panic growing by the second, but he barely registered her. His hands were gripping the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low. "You think this is over?" I turned, meeting his gaze with calm finality. "It is over." His jaw tightened. "I can fix this." I tilted my head, amusement flickering through me. "Fix what, Ryan? Your child is gone. His grandparents have more than enough evidence to keep him out of your reach forever. Your business? That board meeting you're being called into? It's not just a slap on the wrist. You're about to lose everything." His mistress inhaled sharply. "What?" Ryan didn't answer her. His focus was on me now, his mind racing, calculating, trying to find a way out. He had always believed he was untouchable, that no matter what happened, he could twist the situation in his favor. But now, there was no version of this where he came out on top, and he knew it. I walked toward him, slow and deliberate. "You spent months thinking you had me trapped," I said, my voice even. "You lied to me. You humiliated me. You thought I was nothing, more than a convenience, a placeholder in the life you actually wanted." His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. I smiled. "And yet, here we are." A shaky breath escaped him. I warned you once," I cut him off smoothly, "that love and loyalty are choices. You made yours." His mistress took a step back, as if finally realizing that the man she had hitched herself to wasn't quite as powerful as she once believed. I glanced at her briefly. "I'd suggest you get out while you still can." She didn't argue. She grabbed her purse from the couch, her hands trembling slightly. "Ryan, He turned on her, his patience snapping. "Not now." She hesitated for a second too long before shaking her head, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Then, without another word, she walked past me and out the door. Ryan let out a ragged exhale, dragging a hand down his face. For the first time, he looked tired, defeated. I studied him, the man who had once held every advantage over me, now standing in the ruins of his own making. A bitter part of me thought I should feel something, vindication, triumph, even satisfaction. But all I felt was peace. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about freedom. I turned and picked up my bag, the last thing I owned in this house. Ryan's head snapped up. "Where are you going?" I let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, Ryan," I murmured, "you don't get to ask me that anymore." I didn't wait for his response. I didn't need it. I walked to the door, stepping through without hesitation. The night air wrapped around me, carrying with it the final remnants of the past. And then I was gone. In the weeks that followed, everything unfolded exactly as I had planned. Ryan's company crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. The board didn't waste time. The moment the evidence surfaced, they pulled their support, cutting him off from everything he had built. His name became synonymous with failure, his reputation a shadow of what it once was. His mistress never returned, whether out of self-preservation or the realization that Ryan was no longer worth it. she disappeared from his life just as quickly as she had entered it. The child, now safe, had begun to heal. His grandparents were giving him the love he had always deserved, helping him rebuild the trust that had been broken. I still checked in from time to time, ensuring he knew he wasn't alone. As for me, I had no regrets. My life was no longer defined by the choices Ryan had made. I was no longer the woman waiting in the shadows, wondering if I was enough. I was no longer bound by the limitations he had set. I was free. One evening, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, the city lights stretching endlessly before me, a different life, a different beginning. My phone buzzed beside me, a message from an unknown number. "You took everything from me." I stared at the words, a slow smile forming. He still didn't get it. I didn't take anything from him. He had destroyed himself. I typed out a single reply before blocking the number. "No, Ryan, I just let you feel the consequences of your own choices." I set my phone down, exhaling as I leaned against the railing. The past was behind me, and the future, it was entirely mine.